The history of Cream. Cream was formed in 1965 by members Jack Bruce, who was a bassist, Ginger Baker, who was a jazz drummer, and Eric Clapton, who was both a lead guitarist and a blues guitarist. All three members were no stranger to fame, however, with Eric Clapton starring in two groups between 1964 and 1965. The most famous, of course, of all his groups prior to Cream was the Yardbirds, which he starred alongside some memorable names too. Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce, on the other hand, had starred in a band together, but did not get along like Eric Clapton and his bandmates. In fact, at one point they nearly killed each other on stage when they were just 24 and 19 respectively, showing that Cream wasn't going to be an easy ride for both. By 1965, all three had separated from their groups, and whilst initially Jack and Ginger did not want to see or speak of each other again, they were forced to after Eric took a liking to both of them. Of course, Eric Clapton couldn't help the fact that that was the case. He took to Ginger's drumming very well, likening it to other jazz drummers at the time, and of course, he liked the way that Bruce played the bass, to a point where it was only eligible that at some point Clapton would ask both to join a group. They've often been given the title the first supergroup ever, as they formed as probably one of the worst, because as you will remember, not many supergroups existed at the time. Many just split up from bands and went their separate ways for good and not forming anyone with any others. What they would inspire, however, is groups like the Dirty Mac, the Travelling Wilburys, Wings and the Plastic Ono Band, which if you haven't already noticed do of course star people from other groups. I myself have also formed a fair few supergroups in our time. For example, the New Goodjets and the Yard Boys. That's definitely not a plug for you to go and see it. Of course, it wasn't just Clapton that took to Bruce and Baker by any means. Bruce and Baker also had a soft spot for their bandmate too, Clapton, obviously. Bruce told in one of his books later in his life, before his death in 2014, that when he first met Clapton, he instantly knew that he was a funny bloke, and at one point they would probably form a group together. His first talk and first meeting with Clapton is nothing short than hilarious. He talked of a time when Clapton walked into a restaurant and without instant, Bruce knew it was him, and he knocked a plate of mashed potatoes and beans all over an old lady, kicking them out in the process. Bruce didn't feel sorry for that moment, as he said that that was the best of his life at that point. Baker, on the other hand, spoke of Clapton as someone who you could relate to and find really funny, talking about a time when Clapton walked up to him after he'd done a show and said, "Yeah, I know you, Baker. You're not all tough and hard, really. At that point, I knew we were going to be friends," Baker once added. Now, this was the days before George Harrison and Eric Clapton became good friends, so the Beatles to Cream were their bitter enemies in the will to compete in a willing competition. But they weren't just competing against the biggest band of the 60s by far. They were competing with a whole host of biggest bands. These included the Monkees, Small Faces, the Bee Gees, and many others. Hell, even Jefferson Aeroplane and the Seekers were getting hits. So Cream had a lot to both deal and compete with. It got to a point where Eric even had to compete against his original band, the Yardbirds, all in a bid to get that all-important #1 hit. Now, it may surprise you that Clapton's original group, the Yardbirds, never got a #1. So at this point, it just seemed like lucky money for the group. 1967 would be their biggest year. In 1966, on the other hand, they would release the first album of their entire era, called Fresh Cream. Now, if you want to know why they called it Cream, I don't know. I mean, the fact that they named it after things that go with any sauce or just anything, it's beyond me. I mean, maybe it was because of an ice cream. Or something else. But I don't know. So I'm just going to let you decide that one. But anyway, their biggest year would come by 67. Now, whilst Fresh Cream was a bit of a success, with some of their songs now becoming classics even today, It was their second album, released in 1967, which got them their first and only number one. Basically, a one-hit wonder in a way. And that was, of course, the ever unforgettable Disraeli Gears, often considered by many both a flop to some haters and a success to some fans. It's considered their arguably best work yet. Now, whilst this was all well and good, by all means, tension started to grow. And I'll take you a few seconds to work out who were the persons who were having the tensions.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
Probably just added some countdown music or something. You're right, it was Baker and Bruce. Seems like that 4-year break from fighting and stuff like that and cooling off did not help the pair. They would constantly argue and bicker about the slightest things on both sides' work. Usually Bruce would criticise the drumming of Ginger, calling it a bit too hazy and lazy. And Baker would criticise the way that Bruce played the bass, calling him slow and he couldn't keep up with the Cream beat. This often led to tensions with both members, with one another feeling sorry for Clapton, who, as many would say, was the angel of the group and rarely made a fuss. Not that Clapton was any better, calling both very, very hard to deal with. There would be the odd time in which Baker wouldn't even get a credit on some of the work, and many would say that Bruce was behind that. Maybe it was because both had a bitter jealousy for one another. Whether they did, or whether it was just blatant not getting along, I'll let you, like the last one, decide. Whether you're on both Bruce's side or Baker's side, both parties weren't helping the band. In fact, both parties, with anything, falling the band, ruining it, if you will. But it was kind of a warning. Clapton kinda saw it coming and just ignored the signs, knowing that it would probably happen at some point. In fact, one story told in the same book in which Bruce met Clapton tells of a time where the group were on top of the pops, and after the show, Ginger stormed off. Both Clapton and Bruce just figured that he went to go and cool off, but what Baker actually did was retrieve to his dressing room and purchase some drugs that he had stored and snorted them until Bruce walked in and found him very clearly high, looking at the stars, he called it. Bruce, fearing the worst and fearing that he might have took a big amount, called an ambulance. Baker was later transmitted to a local hospital where his heart, which was considered pretty much unstoppable, was able to be lowered to a sensible, normal and safe rhythm. Baker would later thank Bruce, however, he did later say it would not change the way he felt about him. The band initially denied the rumours that they were going to be breaking up, saying that just because there was tensions didn't necessarily mean they had to, disband. But later, as 1969 drew in, they released a final album, Goodbye, and it became quite clear that that meant they were breaking up. Of course, that was not the last we heard of the trio. Baker and Bruce would often work with one another, despite their arguments and disputes for one another. They would appear on American TV, British TV, Scottish TV, and of course, Bruce was obviously from Scotland. He would be in Scotland playing some gigs. And of course, Eric, out of all three of them, became the most successful of the three, releasing songs like Layla, I Shot the Sheriff, and working with George Harrison on both Brainwashed, All Things Must Pass, organising the concert for Bangladesh, Concert for George in 2002. He made a tribute song for his son who died in 1991. So Clapton did a lot after Cream. A lot. He even formed a group with Ginger Baker at one point called Blind Faith, and would later be in a band called Derek and the Dominoes that made the song Layla, that was about his love and affection for George Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd. But I don't need to get into that, because believe me, if I did, it'd be very messy. Who are you on, George or Eric? I don't even know at this point. This is a Cream video. His work over the years, though, understandably led him to get Grammys, and by 1993 he had about 3 of them. The same year he got his third Grammy, he also was inducted alongside Baker and Bruce in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. By the 2000s, the band had repaired their relationship to a point that in 2007, to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Cream being a thing, the band decided to come back and give it another go, with live shows and a potential album in the works. But sadly, what was not in the works was Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce making up. After a very disastrous tour in the United States, the band once again, for the final time, split up. Bruce and Baker would never again come in contact with each other, as after a battle with liver failure in 2014 at the age of 70, Jack Bruce would succumb, putting an end to the over 50-year feud between the pair. Baker, for the last 5 years of his life, never got over the fact they never made up, feeling a lot of regret about the whole situation, saying that their inner bitterness and inner parties led them to be distant. In 2019, at the age of 80, after a battle with COPD, he passed away too, leaving the last living member as Eric Clapton. Now, Clapton, in the years since Baker and Bruce sadly passed away, hasn't really opened up on the losses, and I can see why. To be fair, like, why would you want to? But he has kept, like, the legacy, if you wish to think this, he has kept the legacy of not only Baker and Bruce alive in both what he does and his work and stuff, but he does it in many of the people he's lost. You know, his son, George Harrison. I could go on. Keith Relf, if you want to throw the Yardbirds in there, maybe he does that for him too. So not only is he the last surviving member of Cream, he's also one of the last surviving members of the Yardbirds, as Keith Relf and Jeff Beck died in 1976 and 2023, respectively. And with that being said, that is the history of Cream. What a long ride, and what a long video indeed. Well, what am I saying? It's not really long. Most of my videos are at this time slot. Anyway, I was watching James Hargreaves' guitar, and you can kind of see the inspiration that I got to make this video in a way. I enjoyed the video, so much as so that I just had to make one of my own, and I was determined to make a Cream history video, and I have. Something which I'm very much hoping that you did enjoy. If you did like it, like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications so that you're always notified when I upload. It means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to me. But yeah, I just had to make a video on Cream because they're a group that I think that I originally thought were just plain ship sailing, but no, they had a lot of Iggy roads to get there. So I think we should just congratulate the group for making it past 1966. But no, obviously it's sad, you know, Bruce Baker never got along until Bruce died, you know, and then Baker felt that regret. But right to the end, he was slagging off other drummers, so Baker was just Baker. And of course, Clapton keeping the legacy of Cream alive, I guess. So that being said, obviously, thanks for watching. I've already said my piece on that score. Again, I've already said my piece. So I'm just going to pop off, and Small Faces video coming out very soon too. So yeah, bye-bye.